and welcome to the Prescribing Prosperity podcast with your host, John and Alex Soutsos. Guys, this is part 2 of an earlier podcast, so welcome back. Good to see you, and I can't wait to get into this discussion.
Thank you, Bill. I'm not sure we should be wading into this territory because it's a very controversial area, but we're going to give it a shot and try and be as fair-minded as possible.
That sounds good. That sounds good, because here's the reality, and this is what we're talking about today, listeners, is that we're talking about a little bit of politics. I mean, we'll go beyond that, I'm sure, with John and Alex, but the truth is that what is happening in the United States today, whether you like it or don't like it, is impacting what is happening in Canada and Canadian politics. And the upcoming, well, at this point, upcoming election, maybe by the time you're listening to it, it might be an election that has just been held, which is at the end of April. So, John and Alex, what intrigues me is from my perch down here in the States, have noticed that the Liberal Party, which is the ruling party, has decided they're going to make this an election about Trump, of all things.
Yes.
Which is kind of interesting, because I don't think Trump is Canadian. I'm not even sure he's ever been to Canada, to be honest with you.
He's definitely been to Canada, but this should not be a surprise to anyone who is an observer of international affairs, because in every country in the world, and that includes the U.S. and Russia and many other countries, when things are not going well for you domestically, you point to international affairs. And so it's been an economic debacle here in Canada for the last 10 years. And so the ruling party does not have anything to brag about. And so they're making this about a foreign issue, and that is the belligerent nature of the American president.
Disregard this inferno behind us. It's not here. Look over there. Hey, it's a bird. A distraction.
It's totally a distractive policy. The policies of Justin Trudeau over the last decade were choreographed by Mark Carney, at least in part for the last 5 of those 10 years. And let's put it this way: things have not been working out very well. We are last amongst 37 industrialized nations in terms of per capita GDP growth in the last decade. Let me repeat that. Last out of 37 industrialized nations in terms of per capita GDP growth.
No, hold on. We're second last. Luxembourg was 0.
Oh, okay.
We beat Luxembourg.
Okay, woohoo.
Which is a country the size of your apartment, Alex.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they don't need GDP growth. Everyone there is already wealthy.
Yes.
So we do need, by contrast, GDP growth. So And really, the policies of the last decade are not different than what in the U.S. you've experienced over the previous 4 years, which are essentially an open border, unfettered immigration. We don't have the capacity to absorb a lot of these immigrants. Many of these immigrants are not here legally. Some are, some aren't, but we simply don't have the capacity to absorb them. We have been asked, or our Prime Minister, by intention, has kept our resources in the ground. Now, if you're an independent observer and you say, well, when you think of Canada, what do you think of? Well, a lot of people will tell you, well, they think of Canada, they think of forests, and they think of oil and gas and gold mining. And our Prime Minister has had the policy of keeping the oil and the gas in the ground with very limited drilling permitted, and whatever does come out of the ground has to go to the United States or the rest of Canada. It's not permitted to be sold outside of North America. And so we're selling our oil and gas at a 20% discount to the United States, which explains a lot of the imbalance in trade, contrary to Mr. Trump's perspective. And so our economy has been a disaster. And one of our provinces, Alberta, there's a lot of discussion there, and maybe not officially at the leadership level, but there are a lot of people are thinking, we think we'd like to be the 51st state. So, yeah, it's been an economic disaster here for a full decade.
And just to give it some hard numbers, we have the 3rd largest oil reserves in the world. We are the 5th largest producer, and 90% of it goes to the United States. And then we turn around, and in some portions of Canada, we import our oil from the United States.
If none of that resonates with anyone, then people should consider this fact. Anyone who lives east of Quebec in any of the provinces knows who Irving is. Irving Oil, Irving Paper, it's a huge Canadian company. They just closed one of their paper mills and are moving it down to Georgia. That tells you everything you need to know about the business conditions here in Canada.
Brookfield happened to move their headquarters, if I'm not mistaken. I'm trying to remember who was the head of Brookfield. Who made that decision?
He's somebody who's very much involved.
Yes.
Yes. So we're speaking, of course, about Mark Carney, who's been parachuted in, like Michael Ignatieff was parachuted in many years ago to try and resurrect the Liberal Party here in Canada. And look, we're not trying to be anti-liberal bashers here. We're just trying to provide perspective on what's been going on here the last decade. The truth of the matter is, there's a group of liberals who ruled in Canada during the 1990s who did a fabulous job. And that was Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien. And they were very much centrists. And they were picking up the pieces of the economy left behind by another Trudeau, Pierre, who ruled throughout from 1968 until 1984. And he put the country's economy in a tough shape, indebted the nation to an incredible amount, scared our creditors to death, and the country was warned by creditors, by bondholders, that Canada has to get its fiscal house in order. And then the Conservative Party took over after that in 1988, and they began the process of getting the fiscal house in order. But there were some controversial constitutional issues that were negotiated during that time, and then the Liberals took over, Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin, and they ran the country from 1992 until 2006, I believe, and they did a very good job economically. So this is not about, we're not bashing Liberals per se, but if someone is doing a bad job, you got to point it out. And the truth is, Trudeau has done a horrible job. He's been a terrible economic manager, and that's because he doesn't know the first thing about economics. He was a glorified drama school teacher, and
he wasn't even a permanent teacher. He was an LTO, a supply teacher.
Yeah, so he did not, and he has a globalist perspective. One of the first things he said in an interview when he was elected is Canada is the first post-national state in the world, which means, in plain English, we're not a country anymore. We're just part of the global community, and we're not here to serve Canadians. We're here to serve the global community. And so he went down the agenda of the climate discussion and all that. And, that's another can of worms we don't want to open up during this discussion. But suffice it to say, in economics, there are no right or wrong answers. There are only trade-offs.
I agree with you, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, John, but it begs a question from me, because I'm sitting outside of all of this, and I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking a couple of things, really. One, it's clear in a nonpartisan way that the Canadian economy is in trouble, and that there are problems within the Great North. And my question to you is, in terms of prescriptions, what's the Liberal Party saying, and what is the Conservative Party saying in terms of what needs to be done in order to fix it?
What the Liberal Party is saying is they're going to have more taxes
and more spending.
And more spending, because it's worked so well the last 10 years. They want to just double down on that strategy. So now the Liberals are talking about home equity tax. So if you're someone who's owned their home for any length of time, you've built up a bunch of equity, you are a target to have some of that equity taxed on a current basis. Even though you don't sell your house, you still may have to pay tax on it. Or if you do sell your house, a portion has to be taxed. Now, what some people listening to this don't understand, in the U.S., you don't have a tax-free sale of your home, but here in Canada, you do. In the U.S., you get tax deduction for your mortgage interest. Here, we don't get that. So taxing the principal residence here in Canada is a third rail. And if they actually get into power and enact that, I think there's going to be a riot.
Well, the reason why it's a third rail is because so many Canadians have, relied on the assumption that it's not going to be taxed. And it is a primary component of their retirement plan that they're going to sell their house and downsize into something smaller and keep the difference. as their as part of their nest egg, if you will, to draw retirement income from.
Sure.
And so if you come along and you just say, hold on 1 second, we're going to chop that out by a third, and you're now going to have to pay a third of that back to us, you are significantly impeding people's cost of or their ability to replace their income in retirement, which is going to do one of two things. It's either going to force them to work longer, or it's going to force them to take a reduction in their standard of living, which means that they're going to consume less, which is again going to decrease the growth in the GDP and the economy of Canada. So, is it beneficial for them to do that? No, but they've gotten themselves into a point they create additional avenues for them to spend money. And by they, I'm referring to the Liberal government is inventing and finding new ways to spend money, and you got to pay for that somehow. And so they're trying to find every source of revenue they possibly can.
And they're also talking about a wealth tax.
Well, the wealth tax was talked about here. I can't. Apparently, is a popular notion on both sides of our border here.
Well, your definition of wealth and our definition of wealth are two very different things. In the U.S., the magnitude of wealth is 10 times the magnitude of wealth here. So we don't have anyone like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or Bill Gates here in Canada. We have some wealthy individuals, but not that big. And if the mega wealthy in the U.S. are open to some wealth tax given the magnitude of their wealth, then that's their business. But here in Canada, there's very few people who can afford a wealth tax. There's a reason why all the high-end department stores that came from the U.S. into Canada have now since left. The economy's been so terrible here in Canada. Nordstrom's couldn't make a living here, and Saks Fifth Avenue couldn't make a living here, and even our Hudson's Bay Company, the oldest department store in the world, 400 years old, is shuttering a lot of their stores. And that speaks volumes about the state of our economy here in Canada. We're in really, really bad shape. Now, the prescriptions from the Conservatives in general terms, and I'm not going to recite their policy platform because I don't know it off by heart, but more importantly, in general terms, they're free market principles. And that is deregulate, expand the supply of energy to bring down the cost of transportation and reduce the gasoline expenses. Similar strategies to what are being followed by the Republicans in the United States, and also cutting taxes and allowing people to make their own decisions about what kind of vehicle to purchase.
I can give you a couple of them just off the top here because I'm aware of them. One of them is the repeal of Bill C-69. One of the most important reasons for that specific bill being mentioned is that is one that impacts the creation of pipelines and the resource extraction of resources from the Canadian soil, if you will, and from Canadian resources, and that will be incredibly stimulative. At the same time, they will completely abolish the carbon tax.
Yeah.
As you've noticed, or as people may have taken note of. Right now, Mark Carney went and he lowered the carbon tax to zero right now. He didn't eliminate it. That's an important distinction. He lowered it to zero. And the reason why he didn't eliminate it is because there is an expectation that he would like to reinstate it if he were to gain power. And if not reinstated at the consumer level, then reinstated at the producer level, which for anybody who has half a brain understands the producers never actually pay the price themselves. They pass it down to the consumer, and so the consumer is going to pay it anyway.
I don't think people fully comprehend that concept because you get this phrase in politics, corporations have to pay their fair share of taxes. And you hear this constantly, and they say they want to increase the tax on corporations. Well, here's the truth. The corporations are just an economic conduit. You raise taxes on corporations, it's going to be passed through in the form of higher prices for their products or services, or it will show up in the form of lower labor. They will cut their workforce, or they will cut their dividend, and their corporate earnings will be lower, so their stock price will not go up as much as otherwise. So there's no such thing as having one group of society pay in place of another group of society. There's only one taxpayer in society, and that is the individual, and it all filters down to the individual. So if you look at per capita income around the planet, the country that has the highest per capita income is Ireland. And why is that? Because Ireland eliminated corporate taxes. They brought it down to zero. I think they've since gone up a little bit, but they're still the lowest taxed corporate jurisdiction on the planet. And so their per capita income is materially higher than every other country in the world. And it's because of eliminating or reducing dramatically corporate taxes. And that's a simple act that we can do here in Canada and the United States. The other thing is that people miss, is they can't see the forest for the trees, is everyone's, their knickers are in a knot over tariffs and the fact that the American president is talking about tariffs. Well, what are income taxes? Whether they be individual income taxes, whether they be a consumption tax, or whether they be corporate taxes, those are all tariffs. So here in Canada, if you're earning a certain amount of income above roughly $230,000 a year, you're paying a marginal tax rate of nearly 55% in the province of Ontario and in many other provinces. 55%. Think about that. You know, the government gets to keep more of your hard-earned income than you do, and that's fair. That's really fair. So those are tariffs.
Yeah.
And so people are losing their minds because their investment portfolios drop temporarily by 15%, which will be completely recovered by whether it's 9 months or a year, it will be completely recovered. But that tax we pay on our income, on our consumption, and corporations pay that filter down to us, those taxes here in Canada, they're all permanent. We're not getting any of that back.
Yeah.
And so people are missing that. Those are tariffs. Income taxes are tariffs.
Value-added taxes are tariffs. Yeah. Digital sales tax is a tariff. You know, the digital sales tax. So one thing that popped up yesterday that one of our clients reached out to us about was the proposed increase in withholding tax for Canadians or basically any non-resident holding U.S. equities. And they were concerned about how that would impact their portfolio. And, you know, it remains to be seen if that will actually ever see the light of day. It's in all likelihood, and in our estimation, it's a negotiating tactic in order to alleviate the digital sales tax that exists here in Canada, which, in the eyes of the Trump administration, unfairly harms U.S. technology companies, who are the largest technology companies in the world, by charging them an additional fee to operate and provide services to Canadians. And so in order for them to incentivize the Canadian government to get rid of that, they're proposing an increased withholding tax on people holding U.S. equities.
And so some people are really worried that this is going to come into place, and it's another reason they hate all Americans. And people are losing perspective.
Yeah, and it goes back to the notion that, you know, these are... a lot of these tariffs are done as a negotiating tactic to try and remove non-tariff barriers. People don't see them; they're hidden in a lot of different ways. But those barriers exist; those trade barriers exist, and they exist with other countries. And people just look at the headline number and they say, "Oh, there's no tariffs between Canada and the United States. What are they getting all bent out of shape for?" Well, there's in fact a lot of different non-tariff trade barriers that exist.
And how about interprovincial trade barriers?
Oh, exactly.
So here in Canada, we're losing our minds over the fact that the U.S. is proposing some tariffs. Meanwhile, British Columbia and Ontario cannot have free trade between them. And that's been going on for over 100 years. So why aren't we addressing that issue first and foremost? As in interterritorial, interprovincial trade barriers, we should eliminate those first and lead by example. And so the issue, as far as I see it, is the American president, and his style is, like I said, that's what is very offensive to most people. But what he's basically doing is he's a competitor, and in my business, in our business, the financial services business is highly competitive, especially here in Canada, but all over the world. So competition makes you better. Competition forces you to become more efficient, forces you to be more creative. And really, that's the way, if I'm the leader of Canada, the way I would view what's going on in the U.S. and the trade negotiations is this is a shot across our bow. We need to be better. We need to be more competitive. And what do we need to do? What changes do we need to enact in order to become more competitive, instead of just having a hate on for the bully next door?
Yeah.
Right. And you go ahead, have your hate on. What's that going to change? People are telling me don't vacation in Florida because, they're Americans and they're evil.
We're evil. We're bad people. We're bad.
You're bad people, Bill. Bill, I don't like you anymore. You're an American.
And here I am, an American on a Canadian podcast. Oh, Lord. But no seriousness though, John. I mean, I read this. Now, I don't know if it's true, so you tell me. Carney's made all this noise, but it's my understanding Carney has secured his place at the table to talk about the tariffs with Trump. Am I right about that?
Yeah. Well, he has what's the expression? He's put a marker in the book, and theoretically to go back and negotiate after he's elected as prime minister. And I think that's wishful thinking on his part. And we're having the same issues here in Canada as they had in the U.S. in terms of polling. So as you know, the polls were indicating that it was a toss-up election in November, and we're getting similar polling here, but. If you look at the attendance at political rallies across the country, it's a ratio of probably 100-1 bigger for the Conservatives than it is for the Liberals. And the chatter on the internet is huge. And never before have I seen so many independent people starting up YouTube channels and other internet networks. And they're all railing against the ruling party here in Canada, looking for a change. And the most important poll is the one that says, is our economy on the right track? And I know in the U.S. there was a poll early last year in March or so, said, is the U.S. economy on the right track? And 30% said yes, and 70% said no. That was the only poll you needed to know who was going to win the election in November. And likewise, we've had a similar poll here in Canada. And likewise, most Canadians are unhappy with the direction of the economy. So that's the only poll that matters to me now, unless there's some kind of Chinese interference, and that is a subject of discussion here in Canada. Unless there's some Chinese interference that sways it, more than likely we're going to see the Conservatives win. And if we don't see the Conservatives win, I fear for our country, because the economy is a mess. It's an absolute mess.
In terms of the likelihood of who's going to win the election, I think there's two caveats to that, Dad. Number one being the betting markets tend to provide very good perspective, and as we saw in the United States, and right now it is favoring in the betting markets the Liberal Party, so that should be pointed out. Number two, the one issue that I seem to have, and maybe this is anecdotal on my part, but a lot of people seem to be okay now with the Liberals now that Trudeau's gone. The thought was, well, Trudeau's gone, so everything's okay again. And Trudeau was the issue. But as we pointed out at the beginning of the episode, Mark Carney has been instrumental in a lot of the fundamental policies, and he shares the same ideology as Justin Trudeau does. So people need to ask themselves, if Justin Trudeau was the problem, and if Justin Trudeau's ideology was the problem, why is Mark Carney different? I did want to touch on the some other things that we should be doing here in Canada, but I'll let you ask your question first, Bill, and we can circle back to that later.
Really, really quick question, because I wonder about this all the time. Because several years back, I had the opportunity to cover the French politics for an election cycle, and one of the things that really blew my mind was I talked to an American who covered French politics from France, and she laughed when I used the term, what about the extreme right-wing party in France? And she said, well, I need to make something really clear to Americans. The extreme right-wing party here in France, if they were in America, would be a somewhat moderately liberal party considered.
Yeah.
So
yes.
I'm now hearing this in Canada, the extreme right-wing party in Canada. And this is the simple question. Are they really the extreme right-wing party? I'm curious.
I think anyone who is objective and has some historical perspective on economics and politics knows that the economic proposals being put forth by the Canadian Conservative Party are not extreme in the least. They might be extreme in contrast to the extreme left-wing policies that have been implemented over the last decade here in Canada, because the Liberal Party previously was a middle-of-the-road party. They were very moderate, or I don't know how you can say very moderate, but they were moderate. They were in the middle, yes. Politically in the middle, economically in the middle. But under the Trudeau leadership, they went and in a hard left, and they're so far to the political left of the spectrum that anyone to their immediate right, whether they're right beside them or at a distance beside them toward the right, they're considered extremists. Or at least that's the narrative they would like to promote, is that they are extremists. But tell me what is extreme about common sense tactics like give taxpayers more of their own money so they can spend it and stimulate the economy. Allow deregulation so companies can expand more easily, allow people who want to start a new business the freedom to start a new business more easily, eliminate or reduce dramatically carbon taxes and gasoline taxes so the cost of moving is dramatically reduced and people can go about their business. And there's nothing extreme about that. And so, yeah, it's nonsensical. And this is not unique to Canada. That viewpoint exists in the US, it exists in Western Europe, and everywhere you have liberal democracies, as anyone who's not a socialist is considered an extreme right-winger.
You know, going back to your question about the relative extremism of the conservatives, the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre is a more traditional conservative party. If you look at the Conservative Party that existed under Erin O'Toole, that existed under Andrew Scheer, they were a more centrist conservative party, if you will, than they were a true conservative party. And I think that actually was to their detriment in the previous two elections. If you look at the things that Pierre Poilievre is suggesting, so for example, the capital gains deferral proposal, is it extreme to defer capital gains if the money is invested in Canada? Yes or no?
That didn't sound like one to me, no.
Is it extreme to invest in Canadian businesses?
No, that sounds commonsensical, actually.
Is it extreme to invest in home building, technology, and manufacturing?
Given that you have a massive housing shortage in Canada? No, I don't think so at all.
Right? You know, reducing some of the regulatory red tape that exists in order to create that housing? That doesn't sound too extreme to me. Like that's you know, everybody the bleeding hearts all like to play their little violin about the housing affordability and housing shortages that exist. You know, the going back to the tax on home equity, they said, oh, it's okay, we're only going to apply it on homes over $1 million. Well, the average home in in the GTA is $1 million, so yeah, it's not
Greater
it's
Toronto
not like,
area.
Yeah, like you're. It's not like you're targeting the ultra elite by saying we're only going to tax people who have $1 million home.
$1 million home is a starter home in Toronto.
That's my home. My home. I live in a townhouse. Yeah. You know, it's not like I'm living the life of luxury over here. It's a very modest home, and it's a $1 million home. And so, you know, to say that we're going to only target the $1 million homes as if that's some sort of extreme level, just speaks to how distorted our home market, our housing market is right now. And yet to have policies that would go out and try and bring the price down by, you know, reducing the amount of regulatory fees that are paid, the amount of time that goes into getting approvals and for zoning and whatnot in order for development to occur, to incentivize home builders to actually go out and produce more homes, that's extreme. We don't want that. We don't want those policies. Those people are bad extreme. Pierre Poilievre.
Getting back to I mentioned earlier about the gap between rich and poor and how the policies of globalization have actually exacerbated that issue. The other thing that's exacerbated the issue of the gap between rich and poor, which is real, it is big and it's material, is the fact that the government has intervened in economic affairs for such a long time that they create the cyclicality in the economy, they create the recessions through their policies, and then they cut rates to zero. And so when you cut rates to zero, who are you helping and who are you hurting? If you're somebody who doesn't have enough money to invest in stocks, and you might have a few pennies in a bank account or in a deposit at the bank account, a time deposit in the bank account, your interest rate goes down to 1% or 0.5%. And meanwhile, when interest rates go to zero, the people who do hold stocks in real estate, they go up in value. Mm-hmm. So stocks take off, real estate takes off, and now all of a sudden, the people of Alexander's generation can't afford the housing any longer because of this disparity that's caused exactly by the policies of governments intervening excessively in the economy, manipulating interest rates up and down like it's a yo-yo. And so they're causing the cyclicality, they're causing the disparity between the rich and poor. And then they say, well, the solution is we got to tax the rich more and just give us more money to spend and we'll fix the problem. And meanwhile, they never fix the problem, but they just keep asking for more and more money to spend.
Yeah, their solution is let's go rob money from the hardworking Canadians who have already, put in a lot of time and effort in paying down their homes. Let's take their money. They're bad people because they're sitting on their equity, and let's give it to somebody else. And that it's a wealth redistribution as opposed to an equalization and an elimination of disparity.
The first thing that should be taught in first year of high school is economics, so people actually get an understanding of how the economy works.
Yeah.
So this is a political discussion, and some people might be wondering, you guys are financial guys. Why are you talking about politics? They're two separate things. They're not two separate things. They're the different sides of the same coin. The policies of the government affect companies and their profitability or lack of profitability. And so it is in our best interest as people who give financial advice to guide people to choose political parties who are going to create a fertile environment for prosperity. So everyone prospers. Whether you have money or don't have money, you will prosper if the economy is strong. And that's what we're advocating. We're not here to dump on the Liberal Party or necessarily advocate for the Conservative Party. We advocate for free market principles, which have been documented and supported by deep thinkers going back 250 years, starting with Adam Smith and on through the centuries. So this is not about Donald Trump or Pierre Poilievre. It's not about Carney and Trudeau or Jagmeet Singh here in Canada or whoever the Democrats put up for the next election. It's about principles of economic prosperity, principles of freedom. And so we're advocating for free market principles to allow for prosperity in our nation. And if our clients have more prosperity, that is good for them. And it's good for us and it's good for everybody. So that's what we're advocating for, and that's why we discuss politics, not for the sake of discussing politics.
If Kim was here, and Kim said this on our last podcast, I'm sure he won't mind me saying it again. When approached with the question about why are you talking about politics, you should be focused on finance, and politics and finance are not related. Kim's answer is always bullshit. Finance and politics go hand in hand. But one thing, you talked about the government involvement in the economy, Dad. One other subject that I wanted to touch upon here was, and maybe I'm gonna piss off a lot of people with this. So if we need to, we can edit this out. But why does the supply management system still exist? You want to talk about, government getting involved in areas where it really has no business. I'd like to know when the market goes down 15% like it has this year, Dad. Who's guaranteeing your income?
Yeah, exactly.
So why is the government stepping in and guaranteeing the income of a segment of our population at the expense of the everyday Canadians who have to consume those products at inflated prices?
So here is for the average person who doesn't understand supply management. Here in Canada, we have supply management for poultry, eggs, and dairy. And what that means is the producers of those commodities are paid a fixed amount every year, and they're given a quota, and they have to produce up until that quota. And if they exceed their quota, they have to actually dispose of the commodities. So you have perfectly good milk being poured down the drain in dairy farms. You have perfectly good eggs being thrown away. You have perfectly good chickens being slaughtered.
How does that feel, Bill, when you guys are paying $20 for a carton of eggs down there during the bird flu epidemic?
I can't even begin to tell you. First of all, I feel like you're making this up, John. But
No. Well, hold on. You don't have to look far, because FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, did the exact same thing in the 1930s. He created cartels.
The early generations of my family actually were all farmers. And I could tell you story after story where of things very similar to this, as a matter of fact, that my grandparents told me. They were just astounded.
Yeah, they're slaughtering animals and disposing of them. And meanwhile, there are soup lineups in the cities of people starving to death. So here in Canada, there's, like in any country, we have a segment of the society who don't earn enough money to get food on the table. they could greatly appreciate the ability to buy eggs at a fraction of the cost that they actually are selling for in the supermarkets, or for that matter, chickens, or for that matter, dairy products, which are all protein-rich sources of nutrition. Mm-hmm. And meanwhile, we're keeping prices elevated for the producers. And who are these producers? Are they family farms? Well, there's some family farms, but most of these farms are industrial farms. So we're maintaining the wealth, and meanwhile the political left are saying, oh, you don't want to, these big rich companies, they need to pay their fair share. Well, what are our industrial farms? Are they not big rich companies? Why are we supporting them financially at the expense of people who don't have enough money to pay for basic groceries? So it is incomprehensible that we are doing this. And the media here in Canada is not doing this subject matter justice. They're not discussing it. And if you want to take this to a comedic level, we can talk about maple syrup. And you know, if you want some real maple syrup, not the fake stuff they put in some products, the real maple syrup here in Canada, I haven't bought any recently, but when I used to buy it 10 years ago, it was $12 a bottle. And now it's what, $20 a bottle, 24? What is it, Alexander?
It's at $25 a bottle at least.
20. So it's doubled in 10 years. So $25 a bottle for maple syrup. This is tree sap. There is no shortage of tree sap in maple tree rich Canada. There's no shortage of tree sap.
At the risk of you know, further angering your Canadian audience by talking about the angry American, my grandchildren both gone to preschools in this country where they practiced the act of sugaring the tree, and then their teacher took the syrup from the trees and turned it into maple syrup.
Yeah. We do the same thing here.
I got it for free for my grandson. Yeah.
So there's a big warehouse in Quebec housing all these bottles of maple syrup, and it's being released in very small increments to maintain the market price of $20 or $25 a bottle. And the same thing happens, as you know, in the diamond industry.
The De Beer diamonds there, baby.
That's right. So there's no shortage of these things. There's enough food for everybody. We just have to allow the market to play its role, and then the price of food goes down. And so that is a real manipulation on our side in the supply management. It is a tariff that's imposed on a lot of countries, including the U.S., but the media here in Canada never discusses it. So,
and it's a tariff on us here. It's a tax on Canadian serious. So people want to talk about tariffs potentially being inflationary, and even that's a debatable topic. But in terms of from the Canadian side of the equation, the tariffs being inflationary. Supply chain management is inflationary. Supply chain management forces you to pay elevated prices for your consumer goods. And so, you know, you gotta look at your own backyard before you can start pointing fingers at everybody else.
So some people think it's debatable that tariffs are inflationary. Tariffs are not inflationary. There's no empirical evidence to support that. Inflation is a function of one thing and one thing only, and that's the increase in the supply of money. And who's in charge of that? The central bank is. And so on both sides of the border, we experienced dramatic inflation over the last 5 years. And that was thanks to the government and their actions. It had nothing to, there were no tariffs being imposed on Canadians or Americans in the last 4 years that were different. But we had all this massive inflation. So going back through history, there's no evidence that tariffs cause inflation. You might have the odd product that cannot be replaced quickly in the substitution effect. So, you know, when I go to the grocery store and I buy, say, a particular brand of yogurt that comes from, for the sake of discussion, Greece, and I say, well, I want Greek yogurt. Well, there are other companies who make Greek yogurt. I don't have to buy the one that comes from Greece. I can buy the one that comes from Canada. And if they're using the same process, then the output is hard to distinguish from the original. And so through the substitution effect, you don't get a price increase. In fact, in some cases, you can pay less for the domestic product.
But even if it's not for the same product, it's just it becomes a substitution effect in the sense that you just consume less of some items in your budget. So instead of being able to afford, 5 items, you can afford 4 items. And so it's not inflationary. It's just a substitution of one good for another, or some goods for fewer goods.
Someone might argue that and say, well, why should I consume one item less in my budget? And it doesn't have to come to that. There's usually an equivalent substitute for whatever is being tariffed. That's not going to create an inflation to you. And if such an item does exist, then it would be temporary until a local supplier produces it, and then the price comes down again.
Exactly.
But the expansion of the money supply is a permanent inflation. The inflation we had the last 4 years, people say, well, inflation has been conquered. Well, the rate of change on an annual basis, it's come down, but the inflation that occurred over the last 5 years is permanent. It's accumulated. The cost of living has permanently gone up by 25 to 30% here in North America. And that is all thanks to actions taken by governments.
So, Bill, I think we've angered a lot of people. If anybody's still listening, I think we should wrap it up for them.
Well,
let's go stick it in somebody else's eye. Let's go poke someone else.
I was going to say, for those of you who are angry enough to maybe want to call John or Alex to let them have a piece of your mind, or maybe have a conversation with them, you can do that, as a matter of fact. And Alex, what is the best way for someone, in all seriousness, who's listening to these conversations, thinking, I would like to have a conversation, maybe I would like to engage them as a financial manager, as a matter of fact. What is the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Best way for them to reach us is to visit our website, which is medwealth.ca. That's med-wealth.ca.
What we bring to the table on the financials, well, first of all, we bring objectivity. We don't get caught up in nonsensical news, and we try and provide historical perspective, so people understand the big picture and don't get lost in the minutia. As we all know, the media focuses on small items. They create hyperbole and to scare people in order to get more clicks on the internet or to get more viewers on TV and radio, so they can charge more for their advertising dollars. And so it's what you get in the mainstream media is a consumption of sensationalism. It is not news. It is not fact. It is a narrow perspective that is guided by people with their own agendas. Our agenda is prosperity. MedWealth Financial Services has the agenda of prosperity. We want what is best for our clients. We want them to increase their net worth. And what we do differently from the big 5 banks here in Canada, or big 6 banks here in Canada, is we provide customization, customized financial planning, customized portfolio management. You're not going to get a bot on your computer screen when you try and contact us. We actually have telephones in our offices, and people can actually speak to us. And if they don't catch us the first time and they leave a message, they will actually get a call back. And that's unusual these days, because try and call any large organization, whether you're in Canada or the US, good luck. You have to search through 15 web pages to get to a telephone number on big companies' websites, whereas you can get ours immediately on our website. And for the record, it's 905-568-2000.
And if you are sitting here panicking because you didn't have a pen out ready to write it down, don't worry, that's in the show notes. You can look it up as soon as you finish listening to the podcast. The other thing you could do right away is, if you're not a subscriber, hit the follow button and become a subscriber. You will be notified every time there's a new episode of the podcast, and you can give it a listen and enjoy it as much as you enjoyed this one. And I would ask, if you like these conversations, please give us a great rating and tell people about it. Word of mouth promotion is an invaluable tool, and we very much would appreciate it. So until next time, I'm Bill Tucker. On behalf of John and Alex and everybody at MedWealth, thank you for taking the time to listen today. And do remember, you can go out today and make today a great day, or not. The choice is yours. Until next time.